Story 1. I woke up during a colonoscopy. I turned my head to look at the screen and asked, "Is that my colon?" The doctor said, "Say goodnight." Then I went back to sleep, but I remembered everything. Story 2. I was awake for both of my hand surgeries in 2023. At one point, I was quietly watching, and the surgeon and assistants were discussing getting lunch afterward. They wanted tacos. I mentioned a local taco place, and the assistant exclaimed, "Oh, I forgot you were awake. I suppose they don't operate on many patients under local anesthesia." We all shared a good laugh. Story 3. I woke up during twilight sleep while having my wisdom teeth removed. The nurse mentioned she needed to find a pink cat Halloween costume, and I kept trying to tell her to check Party City. Story 4. My dentist said in a fairly relaxed tone, "You're not supposed to be back yet." I tried to say, "Well, do the thing then," but I wasn't awake long enough, and there were metal instruments poking around in my mouth. It was a strange feeling, but not scary in any way. Story 5. I woke up while they were putting my femur back into my leg. I didn't see much, but I remember feeling as if I was being shaken. Surgery sometimes requires violent movements, I guess. I also woke up during my wisdom teeth extraction. Someone was holding my head while the doctor was using their full weight to pull a tooth. Story 6. I had intravenous sedation for my wisdom teeth removal. I woke up partway through the procedure. The dentist exclaimed, "Oh no, he's awake." I pointed at the intravenous bag, and everyone laughed, with someone jokingly saying, "He wants more." They put me back under. Story 7. A friend of mine, who works in healthcare, woke up during a kidney stone surgery. The doctor we worked with was looking at the X-ray screen and said, "Where did that stone go?" My buddy, an X-ray technician with 30 years of experience, woke up, looked at the screen above him, pointed to it with his finger and said, "It's right there." The urologist responded, "What?" Put him back to sleep. Story 8. I heard some gossip about a date, then I was out again. When I woke up, I was instantly wide awake. I felt hungry, and the food was so good. I was getting a sebaceous cyst removed. Story 9. They were discussing purchasing vintage lunchboxes online. I wasn't fully awake or in pain, but I sensed their hands were inside me. The anesthesiologist noticed my eyes were open, and I became fully alert again when they were wheeling me into recovery. Story 10. I barely woke up after having my wisdom teeth removed. I could feel them breaking up my teeth. The dentist said I had very twisted long roots, which made the procedure take a bit longer than expected. I didn't feel pain, but I remember thinking, "Wow, I'm awake." Story 11. I was having cataract surgery in my late 20s, thanks to my parents for the good genes. Beforehand, I informed the medical staff that I needed a bit more pain medication than most people, but they reassured me that I would be fine. During the procedure, I saw bright red flashes and everything was completely silent. I managed to think, "Guys, I'm awake." But no one seemed to hear me. I was trying hard not to move my eye because having a scalpel near my eyeball and melting my lens was terrifying. I started shaking my hand to get their attention, and finally, they acknowledged me and said they had a mover, then increased my medication. Everything went well, but I often panic when I think about that experience. Story 12. A fire alarm had gone off and they were evacuating. Luckily, it was only a colonoscopy, so they ended the procedure, and I woke up to them wheeling me out. Unfortunately, I had no idea what was going on and thought I had died because there were red flashing lights and loud sirens. It was a stressful experience. Story 13. I have woken up for 1 tooth extraction and 2 colonoscopies. I spoke to the anesthesiologist on all occasions when I was supposedly under. They topped up the dosage and I fell asleep again. For context, I am a stealth redhead. My hair is dark, but when I was younger, my beard was red. I also have a red-headed child, so I clearly carry the gene. Redheads are notoriously difficult to anesthetize. Story 14. I never woke up mid-surgery, but I had a special case of a half-state coma, where I was sedated but still half awake. This was because, for the surgery, I had to move my body when the surgeon told me to. With a full coma induced by narcotics, this is not possible. So I experienced a state between being normal and sober and being heavily affected by propofol. It was a very strange experience. What I remember is that I drifted off in my mind. For some time, I thought I would be on a beach, like on holiday in summer. Then I suddenly heard the surgeon again giving me commands, and I had to concentrate to barely be able to move my eyes in the way he wanted. It was eye surgery. I had to look left, right, up, down, and so on while I was sedated. They actually used cocaine drops, and yes, cocaine, not lidocaine like in most other cases, for the eyes, but I did not experience any drug effects from this. It's very rare for cocaine to still be used in medicine, but it is still available. Anyway, I had to go through this surgery for strabismus, and it went well. But again, I was always in some dreams until I woke up again when they spoke to me. Whenever they stopped speaking, I drifted off back into the world of dreams. I guess this is not what someone would want to hear, but it's very rare for someone to wake up and stay awake during surgery. If you just wake up for a moment, that is not bad. You are sedated and numb because of the painkillers and oxygen mask anyway. Story 15. I have no memory of it. They told me afterwards that I didn't know I was being operated on and was talking to them. Story 16. I woke up during a cardiac ablation. They literally burn spots in your heart to prevent atrial flutter, and that's what it felt like. Someone burning the inside of my heart with a lighted cigarette. I received about 45 burns, and I was awake for 8 to 10 of them. I was wearing a continuous positive airway pressure device, so I couldn't really talk, and they told me to stop grunting and squirming in pain, which made me wonder why they weren't at least curious about my discomfort. There was enough residual anesthesia that I couldn't anticipate future pain, so it felt like the same burn being repeated on a loop, like a fever dream. It hurt significantly, but it didn't worry me, if that makes sense. I told the surgeon the next day, and he just said, "Huh, I always felt I should have received a 10% discount on the anesthesia or a free brownie from the cafeteria or something." Side note, they wanted me to remove my wedding ring before the surgery, and I refused. I couldn't say why with my wife right there. If I was going to die on the table, I wanted to be wearing that ring when it happened. Story 17. I woke up during my wisdom teeth procedure with my dentist's hands and tools in my mouth. I felt no sensation, only the ability to see what was happening. He noticed I was awake and gave me a wave followed by a thumbs up. A week later, he explained that the thumbs up was his way of telling the other doctor to increase the anesthesia because I was awake at that moment. My mom and I still laugh about this. Story 18. I had rhinoplasty to fix my crooked nose. I woke up to the sound of classical music and a blood-soaked rag over my mouth, unable to breathe due to blood pooling in my throat and nose. I couldn't move, but my body kept coughing involuntarily. The doctor placed the rag over my mouth to prevent my coughs from spraying him with blood, but it became so saturated that it blocked airflow, which felt like being waterboarded. Sometimes when I coughed, the bloody rag moved off my mouth, allowing me to gasp for air until the doctor put it back over my mouth. Occasionally, I felt the pressure of the doctor pushing a rasp into my nose and shaving away at the bone. Fortunately, there was no pain, but the sensation of suffocation and helplessness was terrifying. Story 19. I woke up during a hernia operation. I felt no pain, but I could sense that they were doing something, so I asked for more anesthesia. Story 20. My mom had surgery last year and woke up in the middle of it. She couldn't feel pain, but she could feel being touched in the areas where the surgery was taking place. She was in a similar state to people in videos after dental procedures. She told the surgeon she was a ninja, booped her nose, and then mumbled incoherently until they finished. Story 21. One of my coworkers woke up during hand surgery after injuring his hand on the job. According to him, it didn't hurt and he asked to see. The surgeon showed him and started explaining what they were doing. And he exclaimed, "Wow, that's so cool." Then he fell back to sleep mid-explanation because they gave him more anesthesia while he was distracted. Story 22. I woke up after my thyroid was cut in half. I remember opening my eyes and thinking, what just happened? It seems the anesthesiologist noticed, as I got knocked out again. Story 23. I didn't wake up, but when my mom was having me via cesarean section, She felt them cutting into her and shouted out while reaching for the scalpel. My dad fainted. They then decided to put her fully under anesthesia instead of just using a local anesthetic. Story 24. I woke up during major emergency eye surgery, specifically a vitrectomy for a torn retina. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel them poking around in what felt like the middle of my brain. I remember thinking that this was the worst thing that had ever happened to me regarding waking up. I started moving my fingers and toes to distract myself, and they noticed and asked if I was okay. I said that it hurt a bit. Then, I remember them asking where the anesthetist was and to get me more pain relief. My thought after that was that they were supposed to be sitting with me. Anyway, it was a blur after that. Story 25. My story is from a different perspective. I was still an intern in the surgery department, where I had to work for about 10 weeks, mostly observing and occasionally performing simple medical procedures. The patient had paid a significant amount of money for a new pair of breast implants. I assisted in the surgery, primarily observing. Once the surgeon finished placing the implants, he wrapped up and walked away, instructing me to stitch her up. I knew how to suture wounds, but I was still a rookie and worked slowly. I wanted to ensure that I didn't make a mess, as aesthetics were clearly very important to this patient. I was halfway through the second wound when the patient began to wake up. The nurses grew frustrated with me for not working quickly enough. It was a terrible experience, and I realized instantly that I never wanted to become a surgeon. Story 26. I had hair transplant surgery in Argentina. The procedure took 7 hours. I woke up after 5 hours and stayed awake for the last 2 hours, completely numb on my head as the 2 nurses continued planting the follicles while singing. I had a TV available and was able to chat with the nurses a bit. Overall, it was a very pleasant experience. Story 27. I woke up during an endoscopy. I had the tube down my throat, but I didn't know what was happening, and the only thing I could focus on was how I couldn't breathe. I remember trying to tell the doctors I couldn't breathe because I could hear people around me. However, I apparently didn't actually say anything. The doctors noticed because my heart rate started increasing, and then I stopped breathing altogether. They took out the tube, I started breathing again, and they gave me more anesthesia. Once I was in recovery, I was advised to always inform the anesthesiologist that I woke up during a procedure so they can adjust accordingly. I've had 2 other procedures since then and have not woken up during them. Story 28. I woke up during stomach surgery. I couldn't move, speak, or open my eyes to let the medical team know I was awake. I could feel everything they were doing inside me. It was the most excruciating pain of my life. I'm not sure if I blacked out from the pain or if they noticed and increased my anesthesia, but the next thing I remember is waking up in my hospital bed. I was told that I came out of the anesthesia screaming after everything was done. I am now terrified of ever having to undergo surgery again. Story 29. When I was in 5th grade, I fractured and sprained my ankle all at the same time. I was partially sedated for the corrective surgery. I remember feeling disoriented while under sedation, and I thought I was on a roller coaster that went through the hospital. My leg was out of the ride and hit every door and turn along the way, which caused a lot of pain. Some impacts were so intense that I actually woke up from the sedation, moaning in pain and responsive. I woke up a total of 3 times and remember 2 of those instances. I kept moaning or even screaming in pain, telling the staff that it hurt. My mom was in the room and has confirmed this with me multiple times. Apparently, it can be challenging to get anesthesia right for a child. Story 30. I had a very small surgery on my ear when I was 5 or 6. Apparently, I inherited my mother's resistance to sedatives and anesthetics. I remember opening my eyes after going under and seeing a very startled woman in a gown and mask. I either screamed or tried to scream. Either way, they noticed I was awake. I think I started struggling because there was suddenly a lot of yelling and someone was holding me down by my chest. They quickly got me back under. I woke up in a hospital bed with 3 or 4 new stuffed animals around me. It's so strange how 20 years later I can still see the image of that woman in the gown and mask. I look back on it now and laugh because I'm sure the doctor was just as horrified about the situation as I was. Story 31. I know this isn't really what the question is asking. I have spinal cord stimulators implanted. Every 5 to 7 years, I need surgery to replace the batteries in my back. My neurosurgeon needs to wake me up to see if I can feel the vibrations. Once I give him the go-ahead, the anesthesiologist administers anesthesia again. My last surgery was in January 2020. We all know what happened that year. The week before and during my surgery, I believed I had a very bad cold. Testing for COVID-19 wasn't available at that time. I called my surgeon before the surgery to inform him about my cold. He told me we would have to proceed because his schedule was booked. The surgery happened, I was placed under anesthesia, and I woke up periodically for the surgeon to check that my stimulators were functioning. Each time I was awakened, I asked the anesthesiologist to wipe my nose or hold a tissue so I could blow my nose as I was strapped to the table. It was just a very strange experience. Story 32. I woke up in the middle of having my wisdom teeth removed. I remember hearing the doctors talking about their weekend plans and cracking jokes. I opened my eyes and started to laugh. One of them noticed and said, "Hey, he thinks it's funny too, but you shouldn't be awake." They proceeded to increase the sedation, and I was out again. Story 33. I was having arm surgery to address a nerve running through my elbow, known as the ulnar nerve. When they put me under, I dreamed I was playing with dogs in a park and had a toy in my hand. A yellow Labrador was tugging on the toy with me like a game of tug of war. I opened my eyes, and the surgeon had my arm extended off the table, adjusting my nerve and ligaments into place. I didn't feel panicked at all. I looked to the anesthesiologist on the other side, and she made a comment before putting me under again. It didn't hurt, and I trusted the people around me, so it was just an odd experience. I was there to repair a dog bite injury. If I hadn't been sedated, I would have obviously freaked out. Story 34. I woke up midway through my anterior cruciate ligament surgery. I remember coming to and seeing the ceiling and one or two nurses. It was very blurry, more so than things usually are when I'm not wearing my glasses. I heard something that sounded like a weird buzzing noise and then some frantic voices. I tried to shift, and that's about it. I woke up approximately 4 hours later. When I came to, my boxers were stained with blood, and I was both concerned and the most tired I've ever been. I kept trying to fall back asleep, but they told my girlfriend and parents to make sure I stayed awake at least until I got home. I remember struggling to get into my dad's minivan and then crying most of the way back because they wouldn't let me sleep. Apparently, I woke up and started thrashing and ripped out my intravenous lines, so I ended up needing blood transfusions. Luckily, I had done an autologous donation since I have type AB negative blood. I donate as often as I can to ensure I have enough in case I need a transfusion in the future, as it's quite rare. I'm not sure how many transfusions I ended up having, but I remember that for the first week, I couldn't sit up in bed by myself. When I'd go to sleep, I would dream about the blurry surgery suite and the muffled voices. I was 17 at the time, so my parents were taking care of me. My mom was so worried I would get addicted to painkillers that she never filled the prescription for Vicodin that the surgeon gave me. I went through the entire recovery with children's acetaminophen, so for the first 2 weeks, I pretty much just cried while trying to watch movies. When I slept, I kept remembering the surgery suite. After a month, I started my physical therapy, but my insurance only covered 4 visits total, so it didn't do much. My insurance didn't cover much of the surgery either. I remember my parents having to take out a loan since our cost was approximately $26,000 after insurance. That was 13 years ago now. My knee is worse off than it was before I had the surgery, and I still have dreams about the surgery, mostly just regarding that buzzing sound and the blurry ceiling, but I'm having them less often now. I actually have a torn medial collateral ligament in my other knee, and it's going to stay like that because I refuse to get surgery for it. Story 35. It was my wisdom teeth. I remember that everything was yellow, and I felt like I was standing and looking straight up. My cheeks felt wet, and somewhere in the distance, I heard someone screaming, just nonstop screaming. It was annoying me. Eventually, I fell back asleep. When I woke up in recovery, I described it to a nurse. That's when they told me that the screaming was from me. I had no idea. Story 36. Not me, but my grandfather had throat surgery without anesthesia. He was 7 years old and was held by a large person while the operation was performed on him fully awake. Story 37. I woke up for a moment during my wisdom teeth extraction and felt the pressure of the teeth being removed. I looked up and saw several people in the room. I can't remember what they were discussing, but something had happened to the intravenous line in my arm, and they stuck the needle in my hand. They administered more anesthesia and ended up having trouble waking me from it. Apparently, they couldn't wake me for hours afterward and became worried, so they called my parents. When I finally woke up, the first thing I heard was my dad walking into the room, and I was completely out of it. Story 38. I was young, I think between 7 and 10. It was less of a surgery since there was no cutting into my body. I was getting rubber tubing placed in my ear canals because some parts of my body were growing faster than others. My ear canals were not growing with the rest of my head, so to prevent them from closing, they inserted the tubing. In the middle of the procedure, I woke up and saw strange people and lights. I called out for my mom, which startled the doctor. I still remember him saying, "Why is he awake? Put him back under." I was told they had to give me enough sedation to put an adult under. Story 39. During my wisdom teeth removal, I wasn't fully conscious but also not completely aware either. Apparently, I kept singing along to the radio, and they had to keep asking me to stop. I have no memory of this. Story 40. I was getting a clot filter removed from an accident I had, and the doctor couldn't get it out. I woke up to hear him really tugging on it, saying, "Come on, you mother." I just said, "I heard that," and they put me back under while chuckling. Story 41. I had to be sedated to get my dislocated shoulder back in place. Because I had received morphine in the ambulance, they had to use a drug they were not happy about. It didn't work well. I woke up to 3 emergency room doctors and nurses forcefully holding my arm. They had wrapped a towel around it for leverage, and the doctor behind me had their foot on my shoulder while they pulled my arm. I became furious, calling the emergency room doctor inappropriate names and yelling that I hated them all, along with much more. The waiting room could hear me, thanks to my wife. They quickly came out and had her sign a release form to give me propofol to help me get back to sleep. When I woke up, the doctor was offended and left after telling me what I had said. The nurse just laughed and said it was a masterclass in stringing swear words together. Story 42. Not a person who woke up during surgery, but an anesthetist who has clearly seen at least 2 people wake up mid-surgery. A 25-year-old female undergoing an appendectomy was in the operating room when the scrub nurse and I were talking about Bluey. Her eyes opened, and she looked at me. I realized she was waking up, so I administered 50 milligrams of propofol. She went back under, and I made a mental note to get a psychiatric consult for her afterward. This was because she required a higher dosage of propofol than most people, which hadn't been discovered before then since she had never had surgery prior to this one. Not entirely general anesthesia, but I had a mother undergoing a cesarean section. I had just given her an epidural, and everything was fine. They had just delivered the babies and were about to stitch her up again when she screamed. I asked her what was going on, and she said, "I can feel the pain." It turned out the cannula had bent when she moved slightly, preventing the epidural from delivering enough medication. Story 43. When I had my wisdom teeth removed, I woke up midway and had a clear image of Clyde from South Park in my head. I didn't feel any pain or anything, just Clyde. Story 44. A good friend had brain surgery. The doctors deliberately woke him up midway to ask him questions about his family. They did this during the operation to stop if he wasn't able to answer. It was a painful and strange experience. Story 45. I had jaw surgery when I was in 6th grade. It was the first and only time I had ever been put under anesthesia. When I woke up in the operating room, I attempted to punch my doctor. Felt like a vague dream, so I have no idea how they handled the situation. However, I would feel sad if I were a pediatric surgeon trying to do my job and a 6th grader started throwing punches. Story 46. They repaired a tendon in my hand and woke me up during the surgery to show me that I could move my hand. My entire forearm was open, and I could see the tendons moving in my arm. It was quite fascinating. Story 47. I woke up during my wisdom teeth removal, started crying, and tried to talk. The doctor yelled at me, saying that I was so overweight they had already given me all the medicine they could, but it just wasn't going to work, and if I couldn't handle it, he would have to stop. I kept crying, so they stopped. They left me in a room to wake up and calm down. I guess they contacted my emergency contact because my dad showed up and drove me home. I ended up having to undergo full general anesthesia in the hospital at a different practice. It was really traumatic at the time, but now it is mostly funny. That office closed down a few months later. No wonder, because that doctor was not very good. For what it's worth, I was overweight but not excessively so, around 225 pounds. Story 48. I woke up during a colonoscopy. It doesn't hurt, but I wouldn't recommend it. I saw the nurse rush over and push the syringe, and then I was unconscious until I woke up. Story 49. I was having my wisdom teeth removed, and I started screaming while the doctor was telling me I couldn't feel anything. He kept insisting that I couldn't feel anything, but I was upset because I was reacting to the medication. I was pretty sure I could feel my teeth being pulled out of my mouth. Story 50. Reading these comments is blowing my mind. Who is going under general anesthesia for wisdom teeth removal? I had a lidocaine injection and a pat on the back. Story 51. I underwent elbow surgery to have a new channel created and a nerve relocated. Turns out I am allergic to Demerol. I woke up to being forcibly intubated. They noticed my reaction, and all I remember hearing is allergic. I tried to stop struggling, and then I was unconscious again. When I eventually woke up, I was confused because I was covered in what looked like welts and my throat was very sore. After some time, I began to remember more. Story 52. I woke up during my wisdom teeth extraction, not under general anesthesia, but with a pill, liquid, and gas because I said I needed to be completely sedated. I could hear everything but couldn't see or feel anything. I immediately started crying and asked them to stop, although I knew they probably couldn't understand me. They put the gas over my face, and I remember nothing else for the next 10 hours. However, I apparently told them I really wanted a poutine afterwards, so I clearly wasn't too traumatized. Story 53. I woke up during my wisdom teeth removal. The first red flag was that it took a long time for me to fall asleep. The surgeon came in and said, "She's still awake?" Then he went behind the chair and, I assume, increased the anesthesia because I was unconscious moments later. I woke up to what sounded like a chainsaw in my mouth. I could barely open my eyes, but I heard everything. When I told them afterward that I had woken up, the surgeon insisted it was impossible that I did. He also dismissed me when I developed a dry socket and only treated it when I called the office in tears because I was in so much pain. Story 54. I was having biopsies taken during a colonoscopy. I woke up and asked the doctor if he was inside me. He pressed on my lower stomach and said he was right there. I started to feel it then. They gave me more medication, and I woke up a bit later with a shaved area. Story 55. I woke up, looked at the monitor near the bed, and saw them moving through my intestines. I asked, "Is that my intestines?" "Yes, it is." "Cool." Then I passed back out. Story 56. Dad said just before the first incision he had a reflex where he almost knocked out the doctor. The doctor said, "Go back to sleep." And like hypnosis, he fell unconscious. Story 57. I was 12 and undergoing a heart procedure that didn't involve cracking my chest, but rather going through veins in my groin and neck. I woke up in the middle of the procedure after initially passing out before they secured me. When I woke up, I started cursing and biting at the restraints, which frightened the doctor, who quickly called the anesthesiologist back in. After the surgery, I told my mom I had the strangest dream. I had to go for a scan in the morning to ensure nothing was left inside while I was fighting. Story 58. I started waking up during oral surgery while they were drilling. I felt a sharp pain in my jaw. Good thing they had me strapped down because I was reacting violently. All I heard was chaos. Story 59. I had surgery to lift one of my eyelids because it was drooping. I was told they would wake me up, but when they did, my brain was eager to get up. Thankfully, I was strapped down and nothing bad happened. I found it amusing that there was no gradual waking. It was just, I'm up, let's go. Story 60. I woke up near the end of my wisdom teeth surgery. The dentist had his knee on my leg as leverage to remove the last tooth. Took a long time, and I started crying from anxiety but couldn't move. Story 61. I became irrationally violent when I woke up during hernia surgery 8 years ago and tried to fight the people in the operating room. That's not who I am or how I behave. I'm still embarrassed about it. Story 62. I commented on a similar post years ago, but I'll share my story again here. I woke up during open heart surgery. I was only awake briefly, but it is still one of my most vivid memories to date. After being prepared for surgery, I fell asleep after receiving the anesthesia, expecting that when I awoke, I would be in recovery. However, I blinked awake to see the doctor and nurses working over me. I couldn't move, but I could feel them cutting me open. I was numb, so it didn't hurt, but it was a very bizarre feeling. The closest thing I can compare it to is pressing your knuckles firmly into your chest one at a time in succession. I didn't see them actually cutting through, as my eyes were looking up to get their attention. They weren't looking at my face, so they didn't notice. It didn't matter because I fell back asleep very quickly. I was a kid at the time of the surgery, so afterward, telling someone about waking up during it wasn't a priority. I woke up in the recovery room with no idea where I was. Intubated, with only strangers around and my parents nowhere in sight. Feeling scared was my main focus at that time. Summary: I woke up during surgery. It didn't hurt, was mostly uneventful, but was still more fun than Awake, starring Hayden Christensen. Story 63. I woke up because the intravenous anesthesia was not properly set in my vein and was spreading under my skin instead. They immediately put a mask over my nose and mouth to continue with gas anesthesia. I don't remember them talking about anything specific, but I was able to ask them if we were done before they noticed I was awake. Story 64. I started to wake during back surgery and told the doctor afterward that I had a dream someone was pulling on my spine with a pair of pliers. He looked at me and said, "Yes, you started to revive and we put you further under. It happened while I was working on your spine." Story 65. I tried to sit up during my gallbladder surgery. It was essential for me to tell my surgeon that he resembled Steve from Blue's Clues. They reacted with surprise, and I was unconscious again. Story 66. My wife claims she woke up during a major lung surgery, but was paralyzed and unable to move or communicate that she was awake. When she was finally able to speak, she told the doctor that she had regained consciousness on the operating table. The doctor insisted she was dreaming due to the anesthesia and did not believe her until she began reciting the conversations that took place in the operating room. What a terrifying experience. Story 67. They administered a paralytic along with insufficient anesthesia, so when I woke up too early in the operating room, they confirmed the procedure was done correctly, but I couldn't communicate that I was awake and the breathing equipment wasn't properly attached. I thought I was going to suffocate. I kept trying to scream for help, but nothing would come out. I could hear the nurses discussing their weekend plans. Finally, my pulse oximeter started beeping, and it took them a long time to notice and adjust my breathing tubes. I have no idea how long it was, but I vividly remember how afraid I felt and how badly I wanted the suffocation to end. When the paralytic wore off, I had a panic attack that lasted for several hours. The staff seemed annoyed with me and administered an intravenous dose of Xanax, getting me out of there as quickly as possible. I was a mess for about a month, feeling like everything I experienced was déjà vu. I'm an avid runner and couldn't run without feeling detached from my body, which I guess is a classic trauma response. After a month, I returned to normal, and sharing that story definitely helps. The silver lining is that I realized I truly appreciate being alive. Story 68. I haven't, but my father, who was undergoing a hip replacement, woke up in the middle of surgery. The surgeon was speaking negatively about his ex-wife to the nurses. My father said that it made him feel comfortable because it seemed to be such a routine thing for the surgeon. Story 69. I experienced excruciating pain after the surgery. I had a laparoscopy, which involves 3 small incisions in the abdominal area to remove endometriosis growth. I awoke right after the procedure was completed, and they were moving me to another bed. The pain was terrible. I screamed, and a nurse shouted, "She is waking up!" Then I fell asleep again. The entire episode lasted no more than 10 seconds. Story 70. They put me back to sleep. That is all I remember. It was strange. They looked at me, startled. Then a gas mask was placed over my face. Good night. Story 71. I woke up during a heart catheter ablation. All I remember is seeing the screens and then going unconscious again. Story 72. I woke up in the middle of cataract surgery. Looking up at the blurry ceiling, I asked, "So, how's it going?" The eye surgeon replied, "We're just waiting for the lens to unroll." Then I went back under. No drama. Story 73. I woke up from a cardioversion because I was in atrial fibrillation. It involves shocking the chest with paddles to reset the heart's rhythm. The strange part was that I didn't remember waking up until the next day. What I recalled was the high-pitched noise and pain in my chest, similar to the sensation of electric jolts. I exclaimed, "Oh no!" after the procedure and then immediately went back to sleep. When I regained consciousness, they asked if I remembered waking up, and I said no. It wasn't until the next day that my memory returned. Honestly, the worst part was removing the tape from the paddles, which pulled out my chest hair. I now shave my chest hair to avoid that pain. It can be surprisingly painful. Story 74. Horrifyingly exquisite pain. I was having extensive sinus surgery and woke up while the doctors were working. I was utterly paralyzed and could not move or make a sound. My eyes were open, and I started crying profusely. Then I heard one of the doctors say, "Oh, he's waking up. Give him more anesthesia." They did, and mercifully I was unconscious again until after the surgery was completed. It has haunted me since. Story 75. I am amazed at the number of comments saying they woke up during tooth extractions. They perform these procedures with just local anesthesia here. Having my lower wisdom teeth removed was one of the worst experiences of my life. Story 76. My surgical team purposefully woke me up during jaw surgery. They put me under, and the next thing I know, I'm being told to open my eyes. I eventually managed to do so, at which point they cover my eyes with a towel and continue with the surgery. I couldn't feel pain, but I could feel pressure and hear the cracking of bone reverberating through my skull. I also clearly remember feeling warm liquid running down my face and wondering if it was blood. I silently cried the entire time. Eventually, they finish and take me to recovery. One of the nurses comes in and says, "Tisk, and I thought you were a nice girl." Unable to talk, I look at her with confusion and grunt. "You don't remember?" she asks. She gets all excited and pulls in another nurse to tell me the story. Apparently, when they started the surgery, my subconscious took offense. I broke the restraining equipment, ripped out intravenous lines, injured a nurse, tried my best to decapitate the doctor with broken equipment, and screamed at the top of my lungs for them to let me go. I remember none of this. As far as I am concerned, I was asleep. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.